Okay, so we're going through the book of Titus. So we did a study on 1 Timothy and then 2 Timothy, and now we're on Titus. They all kind of blend a little bit together. The book of Titus itself isn't very long, but we spent the past probably 3 or 4 weeks going over just the introduction to the book of Titus, which is only 4 verses. It's just basically the from and the to. Hi, this is from Paul. It's to Titus. It could have been that simple, but not really, because Paul put a lot of stuff in there. If you remember, just to kind of get us in perspective again, once again, we had a guest speaker out last week, Brian Walker, and so we kind of need to get kind of ourselves back into place. We're here in Crete, okay? Paul is writing to his buddy Titus. Titus is kind of that guy. He's kind of like the fixer, all right? He's kind of the guy that he would send into places that needed help or needed direction or needed fixing, so to speak. So he was the fixer. And sure enough, Crete was one of those places. So he sent Titus in there. Now, during Paul if you remember, once again, Paul is incarcerated. He travels over here to Crete. And while he's there, he's allowed to do a little bit of ministry. He does that. He kind of sets up a little bit of stuff and things like that. And then they take off. Once again, that story is a whole different story, when he takes off and they're like, we got to get on the sea. And Paul's like, don't do that. He's like, no, we got to go. And then they get shipwrecked. You know what I mean? That's a whole different story. But anyway, when he has the opportunity, he takes his buddy, the fixer, Titus, and sends him into Crete to help out. We're about to get into the next part after the introduction that he gives to the to and the from. This is from Paul to Titus. Once we get through that, we now get into the actual structure and kind of the purpose of what he's doing here. And we're going to be going through Titus 1:5 through 9 in the next few weeks. And the thing that we need to understand, what we talked about last time, when we talked about the introduction, was kind of about Paul's concept of leadership. Paul's got kind of a 2-pronged purpose, and I put I kind of titled 5 through 9, Order and Elders. I didn't know what else to call it. I couldn't think of a cool name. But Order and Elders. If you remember, Crete was a place where they were had less support per se than the mainland did. The mainland had a lot more support, a lot more people, missionaries, things like that. The island of Crete was kind of hanging out on its own. It was kind of a stop place for people to go as they were going from here to there. If you're going around the Aegean Sea, you would go here up into the Adriatic Sea or on to different places. Crete was kind of a stop place for that. If you were traveling in, rather than going in to the Aegean Sea to go in, Ephesus was a huge port city, but you'd have to go in a little bit further. Here at Crete, you could kind of go to the outside. Lots of different crazy things going on in Crete, lots of different people coming and going. That's where we get that saying, you Cretan. Crete was the people that were the barbarians, the uneducated, the hicks, type of a thing. And Paul didn't see them that way. He saw them as a wonderful group of people that just needed a little bit of order and just needed a few good men, a few elders to kind of help them get on track. And he started something there, and he didn't want to leave it, but he had to at the time, but now he sends Titus back. Once again, the letter that is written to Titus was, once again, for the purpose of not just to instruct Titus, but most of the letters that Paul wrote to people were read out loud to the congregation. So a lot of the things that you're going to read in these letters, just like we saw with 1 Timothy and with 2 Timothy, Paul is doing it to help instruct and encourage Titus, but he's also doing it for the people that will hear it as well. So in doing that, now that I've laid it up for you, in doing that, Paul sees church leadership and he sees the gospel kind of intertwined with each other. Okay? Really intertwined with each other. In his mind, there's very little difference between those who are instructing and what is being instructed. Because if you are truly embodying what, the topic in which you're instructing, you are committed to living that topic. Okay? So Paul doesn't really see a difference between the leaders of that, the leaders of the church and of the gospel and of that message, that wonderful mystery that we know, and the people that live it. Okay? Because it's really, really hard to live one way and get people to, follow you in what it is you're teaching if you're not living that same way. So he kind of sees those so intertwined with each other. Okay? And that in and of itself is a lesson for us if we're going to, Paul talks about it. He wrote a stern letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians and said, guys, you need to, not be a hindrance to other people. You need to get on board and start living. If this is the message that you're going to portray, then you need to live it. You need to own it, right? So he kind of sees that, and that's how he kind of is committed to them. So it's kind of interesting, and I'm going to kind of go over just some structural things about the book itself. Once again, it's only 3 chapters long, okay? The whole book of Titus. So it's not super long, but in it, he gives kind of a circular thought because he sees the message and the messenger as being intertwined. The first part of Titus, basically, he kind of communicates the idea of church leaders need to be identified by their commitment to the truth. And then he kind of does the opposite. Your commitment to the truth is what identifies you as a leader. So he kind of does this circular kind of thinking because he thinks that they're so intertwined. If I was going to, for clarity's sake, if I was going to divide it, I would divide the whole of Titus into 2 groups. That would be the leadership of the group and then the mission of the church. Or the leadership of the church and the mission of the church is kind of what he talks about in Titus. Okay? So this first part, he kind of really talks about the leadership of the church. Now, one of the things that he tells Titus, which is kind of interesting, is we need order in elders. That's what we're going to see here as we get into the very beginning of what is going on. Okay? And as he starts to talk about leadership, because that was something that we really talked about before, once he starts talking about leadership, he doesn't really give a whole lot of structure or order, per se, right? And that's kind of one of the main things that he really wants for doing that. He was able to go to Crete, and he was able to preach and teach to them, but he didn't have a chance to get them kind of organized. He didn't have a chance to set up elders to get things going. He wasn't there long enough to really get in there. So that's Titus. Titus, he's like, man, we got to get in there. You got to get things organized. You got to get some guys in there to get this thing going so it can perpetuate itself aside from us, right? That's kind of what his thinking is, all right? So that's what his model is, so to speak. But as he talks through this, you're going to see that he doesn't really talk about what the structure of the church should be, per se. He talks about what the structure of you should be, okay? If you are devoted to the truth, then how you live will reflect that truth, and the rest will all just work itself out, is kind of his thinking. And it's not a bad plan, because you can easily see the evil intentions of others. But if you see someone genuine, that obviously stands out to you. And that actually draws people in. That kind of a personality, that kind of a character trait, all right? There's a sense of safety and truthfulness about that person. And that's what he's talking about here. So, all right, the stakes are high. He's wanting to get in there. He wants to get everything kind of situated. And on a side note, I will throw this out there, on a side note, Paul's very passionate, and we're going to see that because he talks about that so much here. He's very passionate about what a leader should look like and what a leader should be like. And in these days, this is me, I'm going to jump off my soapbox for a second. These days, what a leader is so watered down that it's almost criminal. And I say that because in churches even, sometimes what a leader should be like or do or act or conduct themselves or whatever, a healthy church is reflective of a healthy leader. And if the leader is not healthy, then the rest, how can you expect the rest to be healthy? You get what I mean? Does that make sense? We're going to talk about in our church service a lot about that, about these two contrasting ideas of how on one side things could be one thing and on another side things could be another, and the two really can't be equal. All right? They go in opposite directions. They focus on different things, right? So to accomplish the structure or the strength of the character of the leader, here he gets into what we're going to be looking at. In the very beginning, in the introduction that we read in verses 1 through 4, we read, Paul, a bondservant of God, an apostle of Jesus Christ, according to the faith of God's elect, and to the acknowledgement of the truth, which accords with godliness, in hope of eternal life, which God, who cannot lie, promised before time began, but has in due time manifested his word through preaching, which was committed to me according to the commandment of God our Savior. That's the from part that we read, that one big run-on sentence. All 4 verses are one big run-on sentence. But here he sees the purpose of the church. He sees that he wants to become the means by which the elect, or the people that are to be part of God's family, God's chosen people, that they will come to belief. And not only that, but he wants to be able to nurture those people to grow in the truth of what God is and who God is to them, which will ultimately affect their behavior, and then also to one step further help them in whatever this world throws their way. He states this right here, right out of the gate. All right? So this is what he wants for the people in Crete too, I think, because that's the spirit behind what he really wants these people to understand. And if it's going to flourish like it does on the mainland, I mean, just think about through Asia Minor, what we know is Turkey today. There were so many different churches and so many different places that he visited and so many places that he set up, and he set elders to be up in there, and they had support groups for each other, and they could communicate. You're on an island, man. So he needs to be able to set them up strong, to be able to function independently, because they don't have that support group. So he really wants that to happen. He really wants that to go on. So he talks about basically 2 things at the beginning of this. We're getting into verse 5 right now. We probably may only get to verse 5 right now. Is it hot in here?
Yes. No.
Or is it just me? I'm about to die. I'm about to die. Okay, verse 5. So when talking to Titus and telling Titus what his assignment is there in Crete, what he's supposed to be doing, he tasks him with basically 2 separate things. And I titled those Order and Elders. I don't know what else to do. I thought it was semi-clever. Well, I thought it was semi-clever. Order and Elders. Verse 5. Okay? This is where Paul starts off. He says, for this reason, all right, what reason? We just talked about that. What's his purpose? His purpose is that he wants to get people to know Jesus Christ. He wants to nurture them, and he wants to help them along the way. That's what his purpose is, and that's that kind of thing. For this reason, I left you, Titus, in Crete, that you should set in order the things which are lacking, and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you. Stop right there. Here we see a 2-fold purpose, all right, of what he wants, or what he's hoping that Titus is going to be able to do. Now, once again, Remember, this is going to be read in front of his congregation. So not only will Titus understand what his purpose is, but everybody else is going to understand what the goal is, right? If you all understand what the goal is, then you can work towards that goal, okay? Back to what we're talking about here. He says that you are to set in order and also appoint elders in every city. That's his twofold purpose right there, okay? Now, let's look at this closer. If you're looking at this verse, it says, "For this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things which are lacking." Okay? That phrase, set in order, believe it or not, is actually a singular word. Well, it's a compound word. It's a singular word, but it's a compound word that literally means thoroughly set straight. Okay, it's not just setting straight; it's thoroughly set straight. I don't know if you guys ever watched this show called Forged in Fire. It's on Netflix, something like that. You seen that? Pretty rad. They get like a bunch of blacksmiths together, basically, is what they do, and they say, okay, you need to build this kind of knife, or you need to build this kind of sword, or whatever. You know what I mean? And that's what they do. So these guys get their metal, and they all have different tricks on how they, mix like this metal with that metal or whatever, and then they pound it out and all this kind of stuff. But the one thing that they have to do is they have to, what's that called now?
Submerge.
Well, yeah, but they have to, they call it something. Temper. They have to temper the blade. And by doing that, they basically purge it in like hot metal. They pound it out just the way they want to. And they have to, and they mix different metals together to give it certain strength or whatever they do. I don't know. And then they pound it out, and then they have to temper it there. They have to put it in this water, or it's not water actually. They have to put it through there, and it cools it and strengthens it, right? And if they pull that thing out, they know if it's tempered properly because it's straight. All right, so they'll take that thing and they'll hold it up. Of course, it's rough. It still needs to be polished and sharpened and all this kind of stuff, but they hold it up. And if it's straight, that means that that metal is strong and it's holding together. It's hardened together. You know what I mean? It's straight. This kind of a thing, this compound word basically, the word literally means thoroughly setting something straight, thoroughly making it straight. He's suggesting that Titus should continue in the pattern of which he has done. If you look there in verse 5, at the end, it says, should set in order all the things that are lacking, appoint elders in every city, as I commanded you. Okay, this concept of as I commanded you means that he didn't just throw them out there and go, have at it, good luck, pin a 20 to his lapel and have at it, whatever. It didn't work that way. As you know, or as we talked about before, Titus had traveled with Paul for years. As a matter of fact, I believe that he became his student. Titus kind of became Paul's student towards the beginning of Paul's first missionary journey. So they've known each other for a long time. When this was written, was several years after that, after the beginning of that, but he had traveled with Paul for a long time. So he knew what Paul was talking about. He knew what he was looking for, what he did. Paul was a guy that was driven. He'd go in and he'd do the same things every time. He'd go into the synagogue, he'd talk to them, he'd take that message out to the people. He'd go and he had this order and people would understand, and he had the same message. And I think Titus was pretty understanding about that. But what we're looking at here is that he suggests that he continue in this pattern. All right? The people in Crete, because it's a port city, because a lot of people are coming and going, a lot of people had a lot of their own thoughts, their own philosophies, their own kind of ways of doing things. Paul was even one of those guys. He showed up on this island and started talking about Jesus, and they were like, whoa, this is awesome. But there were also a lot of other people that are coming and going with their own philosophies and everything. So, it would be really easy without somebody to literally be there to set things straight, thoroughly set things straight, that somebody wouldn't be able to, figure it out. You know what I mean? That word, it's a compound word, kind of the second part of this compound word, what we render as set in order. in English. In the Greek, it's a pedortho. The second part is orthos, okay? And that orthos is where we actually get our English word for like orthotics, like orthodontics or orthopedics. It's the concept of getting things straight, right? Well, if you go to the orthodontist, what do they, get Kyla around here, she probably hates the orthodontist. Why? Because she has braces. And the whole purpose of that is to set her teeth straight, right? What it takes. You know what I mean? Orthodontics, right? That's the concept of the meaning, is to set this straight, to do what needs to be done to make sure that everything is there. And to couple with that, the concept of looking for people that can help you to set that straight. He's talking about all the different, there's so many different thoughts, philosophies, false teachers, all these people coming and going, and you don't have the benefit that the mainland has to have that support group. So it's hard to know what to do. You know what I mean? Here he's talking about, he's saying, set these people straight. Thoroughly set them straight. Make it so that they understand exactly what we're talking about here. Okay? Does he talk about how to do that? Does he talk about the structure and order of the church? No. He's talking about what his purpose is. You got to set this thing straight. Okay? You got to make sure that they understand. Does he understand how to do that? Oh yeah, Titus has traveled around with Paul for years. So he probably understands what needs to be done and what Paul has done in the past. And he's saying, do as I've done. All right? Use that as a model. All right? But he's not telling them exactly how to get it done. More importantly is to make sure that you set things straight on the things that are lacking. That concept of lacking. What is it that they're lacking? They're lacking that order, right? They're lacking that order. They're lacking that structure. They're lacking that whole piece of the puzzle. All right? So, he's talking, that word command, I didn't really talk about that. I kind of breezed over that a little bit. That word command, the verb also means arrange. It's consistent with the verb arrange. It's to establish, it's to place in order. So he's saying, you know what I've done in the past. You know how I've arranged things. You know how I've put things into order. So here is how, just remember what I did and then adapt it to whatever you got going. You know what I mean? Is what he's saying here. To him. That's the first part. Okay? So he's trained, he knows what he's supposed to do, he's seen what Paul's done before. He says, use that kind of as a pattern. Use that how I've arranged things. You know how I've done it. Now you kind of get that going here. That's the first part of the puzzle, is to try and get some order in the chaos, set things straight. And then the second thing, Paul directs Titus to appoint elders. That's the next thing that he says there in verse 5. He says, you should set in order the things which are lacking. Okay? And then once again, that is coupled with, as I commanded of you, or as I've done before, as I've arranged or set into place before. You know what I've done. You know how that goes. And the second thing he says, and appoint elders in every city. Okay? Appoint elders in every city. Once again, he uses this appoint elders thing. This is another word. It's a singular word, but it's a compound word, once again, in the Greek. And interestingly enough, this word elders, so Paul, actually we're going to see in a couple of verses, Paul uses two words kind of interchangeably, and there's a lot of people, a lot of commentators and stuff that'll tell you that Paul easily uses these two words interchangeably for the word elder. Okay? The word he's using right now is one type of elder, and then episkopos is another type of word that he uses for elder or bishop, which we're going to see in a few minutes, or in another verse here coming up. He uses these words interchangeably, but there is a difference between the two. And the difference, I think, personally, is notable, because that's what, if you use the word because it means something, then you should know what it means, right? So it's kind of the way he goes. Here he says, all right, he says, your purpose is that you should set in order the things that are lacking. So you need to set things straight, make sure that everything is straight, and you need to appoint elders in every city. That word elder, the word he used there, is in reference to a person. The other word, the episkopos, is the job. Okay? So, if you were talking about, is that a good analogy? A fireman. If you're talking about a fireman, you could be talking about the person or the job. Is that what I'm saying? Sure. It's kind of the same word. Or firefighter might be even better. A firefighter is somebody who goes into a building and fights a fire, right? That's their job. But if you were talking about, hey, my brother is a firefighter, you're referring to the person. That's what they do, right? You're referring to the person versus referring to their job. If you're standing there going, hey, my brother's a firefighter, you're talking about your brother. You're talking about a person. If you're standing there and you go, firefighter just ran into my house because it's on fire, you're talking about the job that he's doing, kind of thing. That's kind of a loose description of what I'm talking about here. One talks about the person, one talks about the job. This particular word that he's using right here, this elder, this word that he uses here, he says you need to appoint an elder. That word appoint means to set in place, or you need to appoint to an office. You need to put this person in the best place possible, and he calls this person an elder. That particular word elder means an older man. So it's referring to a person. Now, back in the day, back in those days, older men were considered to be the people that were utilized to lead. Because they're older and hopefully wiser, they've got more life experience, so they have more ability to be able to coach people with the knowledge that they have and all those kinds of things. That was the culture back then. They even honored older men because of that simple fact. If you're an older man, well, you must, have seen and done a lot more things than I have done. So they kind of attributed older men to wisdom, all right, culturally speaking. But just because you're old doesn't mean that you're, you're capable to hold the office that he's talking about, right? Just because you're older, you may have done some things, seen some things, experienced some things that other younger people have not. But just because of your age, that does not qualify you to be a leader, an elder that's going to bring about order. Okay? Because this is the goal. I think these two goals, once again, I don't think he can separate these two goals from each other, although they are two separate tasks, two separate goals. I think he marries them together, because how can you have order without the proper leader? And if the proper leader is leading, then you would ultimately have order. I don't see how you can devoid those two from each other. Okay? Devoid those two from each other. So I think just in this first verse, I think what he's really telling him to do is he's explaining to him what the purpose is of the whole letter that he's going to write. And like I said, if I was to simplify or clarify what he's talking about here, I'd say that the first part of what he talks about is church leadership, and the next one is the mission of the church. Right here we see the same thing. He's talking about how you need to get proper leadership in there, and then you need to talk about how that proper leadership is going to bring about order and set things straight. And that type of thing. It's kind of a circular pattern that I think he goes in, talking about how these two things interrelate to each other. So the role and the qualities of a person shouldn't be determined necessarily by age, but by the qualifications. I say that because in the next three verses, he goes into an explanation of what that looks like. He doesn't just say, if you're an old guy, go ahead and, take leadership. He doesn't say that. He says you need to become a leader. You need to be in leadership. You need to set things straight. I need elders, is that word he uses. It's not just an old man. He's talking about more of a wise person, somebody who is wise in those ways. What ways? Well, thankfully, he doesn't just leave that ambiguous. in the next couple of verses, he literally tells you 17 different things that qualifies you as what that job description looks like. So that's kind of awesome. You know, a lot of times in the Bible, we think to ourselves, man, I wish the Bible would just tell us, well, man, you're about to get it. Okay? Gus Malink, he's going to let you have it. He's going to unload, blah, 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 here it is, and let you have it. And I will not let you have that part because we are out of time. Do you have any thoughts or comments or questions on this part? Just this verse right here.
We've had students that graduate and want to get into ministry and put to practice what they've learned. But they get to these indigenous congregations and the old men who are not trained say, no, you're too young, you can't, they won't let them do anything.
Yeah. Paul addressed that. We read that. We addressed that when it came to Timothy. You know, we went through 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. Paul addressed that with Timothy. Don't let any despise you because of your youth. But, you know, Timothy was probably around 40-some years old, which back then wasn't old enough for them, apparently. You know, but they didn't take into consideration that Timothy was a guy that literally for like 10 years, over 10 years, traveled
Our
with
student had like 200 kids coming at, I don't know how many times in a week, winning some to the Lord, and all of a sudden this crazy thing happened that the ministry above them, which was in somewhere in the States, said, it's up to you. And so he said, not our student, but the man there in the church said, all right, we'll take everything that Don Enrique has, and we'll take them in our large church. And it was a Bible church, but he just wept because right under his feet, all gone. About a mile and a half or maybe 2 miles away from his. And that's where he, accepted Christ. But it was a crazy thing. Oh no, you're not old enough. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He had his 4 years of seminary training. Yeah. And so the old guy took it, and he's the song leader. He was a song leader. He couldn't match a pitch. Right. And our student could play on both the piano, the organ, and guitar, and yeah, it was tough for him.
So that's so that's what I'm talking about is that's why we need it when we look at these words. I guess the reason why I tell you about these words and what these words mean is so that we can understand not just what Paul is communicating, but understand the culture of the time.
Yes.
You know, first century, you're talking about, well, actually, that wasn't the first century. That's actually longer than the first century. You're talking about how people just respond to certain things. When I went to Turkey, no, Egypt. Mm-hmm. When I went to Egypt, one of the things that they would, if you were an older guy and you had a beard, okay, people would automatically, if you were an older guy and you had a beard, that automatically just commanded respect from people. Weirdest thing, just because you had a beard, people would go by and go, "Oh, you got a beard," like only people that were elders or wise would grow old and get beards. You know what I mean? So if you had a beard, that kind of commanded respect type of a thing, which was kind of funny because I was traveling around with some of the people that were there, and one of the guys that I was traveling with, he had a beard, and people would always go, "Oh, you got a beard," type of thing. All the people would go, "Oh, you got a beard," and I would just go, "No, he's not smart, so don't worry about it." It's just kind of funny. That's the culture of the time. You know what I mean? So Paul, what we're about to get into is an explanation by Paul himself on what you're looking at. Now, in theory, to be able to envelop all these things and to have a good track record of these things, it might take you some time to actually live out those things, but it doesn't require you to be in a specific age to be able to envelop develop yourself into what God would have you to be. And I think that's an important part for us to understand in our lives, is that living for God, it doesn't have a shelf life, it doesn't have a timetable, it doesn't have any of those things. All it has is what God's done and how you're going to live it, how you're going to react to it. That's the only thing. And once again, we're going to talk about that in our church service today when we talk about our last door that we're talking about is doors in the Bible. And this is a little foreshadowing on the front of your bulletin right there. What door you're going to choose, what door you're going to live like. Okay? So, any other thoughts, comments, observations, ideas? Okay, let's pray and we'll be done. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time that we could look at this part, just this first verse, into the purpose of what Paul is writing to Titus, and help us to understand it as well. It is important. Paul could not separate the concept of good leadership and a straightforward, orderly church. The reason being for him is if your character is correct and you're living for you, Father, then if you're living for Christ, then that will be displayed in the way that you live, in the way that you conduct the business of your life and the business of the church. And if the business of the church is being conducted in honor and glory for you, then of course it will inspire other people to be like-minded as well. It's kind of a circular thought process, and it makes perfect sense. And what does that mean for us today? Well, dear Lord, I would ask that you would give us, as individuals and as a church, I would ask that you give us the strength and give us the courage and give us the knowledge and give us just the daring, the boldness to go before this world and live like we know what the future holds. Because we do. If we've accepted Jesus Christ as our personal Savior, if we've accepted your Son and your grace, then victory is ours. It's a freeing, all-encompassing reality to us. So we need to live in honor of you and thanksgiving for what you've done for us. Dear Lord, bless this time that we have. Help these words and this concept just to sink deep within the core of who we are and stir us. Stir us to the very heart of who we are. Help us to truly honor and glorify you with what we do and who we are. And we ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.